the ultimatum. The observation deck of the Imperial Dreadnought stretched across 300 meters of reinforced crystal, offering Supreme Commander Vextar an unobstructed view of the Caltharian home world below. The planet glowed like a jewel in the darkness, its surface covered in sprawling cities that had stood for 15 millennia. Vextar's 3 eyes narrowed as he studied the holographic projections floating before him, each one displaying data that troubled him more than he cared to admit. The Caltharian Dominion had ruled this sector of space for longer than most species had possessed written language. Their empire encompassed 200 star systems, each one home to civilizations that had willingly submitted to Caltharian authority. Some had joined peacefully, attracted by the promise of protection and prosperity. Others had required more persuasive demonstrations of Caltharian military superiority. Either way, the result had always been the same: absolute dominion. But now something unprecedented was happening. Red markers dotted the holographic star map like a spreading infection, each one representing a human colony that had appeared seemingly overnight. 50 years ago, the humans had been confined to a single unremarkable yellow star system on the outer rim of explored space. The Dominion scouts had catalogued them as a young species, barely worthy of notice. Their technology was primitive, their ships were slow, and their understanding of the galaxy was laughably incomplete. Yet here they were, spreading across territories that the Dominion had claimed for thousands of years. Their merchant vessels traveled trade routes that had belonged exclusively to Caltharian interests. Their colonies dotted worlds that should have required Dominion approval to settle. Worst of all, other species were beginning to trade with them, forming relationships that bypassed Caltharian oversight entirely. Vextar's communications officer, a young Caltharian named Zephyrim, approached with careful steps. The commander's mood had been dark for days, and wise subordinates knew to approach cautiously. Zephyrim's bioluminescent skin patterns flickered nervously as he delivered his report. Supreme Commander, the intelligence summary you requested has been compiled. The human expansion shows no signs of slowing. In fact, our analysts believe they are accelerating their colonization efforts. Vextar turned from the window, his towering form casting long shadows across the observation deck. Like all Caltharians, he stood nearly 3 meters tall, with muscular limbs adapted for the heavy gravity of their home world. His skin bore the deep purple coloration of the warrior caste, marked with golden patterns that denoted his rank and achievements. "Show me their fleet strength," Vextar commanded. The holographic display shifted, showing grainy images of human vessels. They looked functional but unimpressive, with blocky designs that suggested primitive construction techniques. The largest human warship appeared to be perhaps 1/5 the size of a Caltharian heavy cruiser. Their hulls showed none of the elegant curves or advanced materials that characterized Dominion engineering. "Our surveillance teams estimate the humans possess approximately 400 military vessels of various classifications," Zephyrim reported. "Their weapons appear to be kinetic projectiles and basic energy beams. Nothing our shields cannot easily deflect." Vextar studied the images carefully. Everything about the human vessels suggested a species that had stumbled into space travel recently and was doing their best to catch up with more advanced civilizations. Their ships lacked the sophisticated energy signatures of proper military craft. Their formations were loose and disorganized. Even their choice of materials seemed outdated. "What about their technology base?" Vextar asked. "Primitive in every measurable category, sir. Their faster-than-light drives are slow and inefficient. Their communication systems are limited to short range. Their sensors cannot detect our stealth scouts even when we pass within visual range. They appear to rely heavily on artificial intelligence for ship operations, which suggests they lack sufficient crew to properly man their vessels." A thin smile crossed Vextar's face. The picture was becoming clearer. The humans were expanding rapidly because they were desperate. Young species often overextended themselves when they first reached the stars, driven by curiosity and ambition rather than wisdom. They spread their limited resources too thin, establishing colonies they could not properly defend. When a real military power finally noticed them, such species quickly learned the cost of their hubris. "Assemble the High Council," Vextar ordered. "It is time to remind these humans of their place in the Galactic Order." 3 hours later, Vextar stood before the Dominion High Council in the Grand Chamber that had witnessed 15,000 years of deliberation. The circular room was carved from a single massive crystal, its walls inscribed with the names of every species that had submitted to Caltharian authority. Soft light emanated from the crystal itself, bathing the assembled council members in a gentle glow that contrasted sharply with the serious nature of their discussion. The council consisted of 12 members, each representing a different aspect of Dominion governance. High Counselor Thrain 9, eldest of the council and keeper of historical records, spoke first. His skin had faded to pale lavender with age, but his voice still carried the authority of centuries of service. Supreme Commander Vextar, you have called this emergency session to address the human situation. State your concerns. Vextar activated the central holographic display, filling the chamber with images of human expansion. Honored Council, the humans have violated our territorial sovereignty. They have established unauthorized colonies in sectors we have controlled for millennia. They have disrupted our trade networks. Most concerning, they have begun forming alliances with species that fall under our protection. Councillor Marashin, representative of the merchant guilds, leaned forward with interest. Her skin patterns shifted to show agitation. The humans have indeed affected our commercial interests. 3 trade consortiums have begun purchasing goods from human merchants rather than our own. They claim the humans offer better prices and more reliable delivery schedules. A murmur of concern rippled through the council. The Dominion's economic power was as important as its military might. If other species began to see humans as viable trading partners, the careful balance of power that had maintained Caltharian dominance for so long could be threatened. What military threat do they pose? Asked Councillor Varntek, Supreme Commander of the Home Defense Fleets. Vextar's confidence was evident in his posture. Minimal at best. Our intelligence indicates they possess perhaps 400 vessels total. We maintain over 3,000 warships across our territories. Their technology is generations behind our own. A single Caltharian battle group could defeat their entire fleet. Then why do we concern ourselves with them? Asked Councillor Plexera, the youngest member of the council. If they are so inferior, let them establish their little colonies. They pose no real threat. High Counselor Thrain 9 raised a hand for silence. His ancient eyes studied the holographic display with an expression that Vextar could not quite read. The Supreme Commander did not call this session merely to inform us of a minor nuisance. Vextar, what do you propose? I propose we deliver an ultimatum, Vextar said firmly. The humans will withdraw from all territories they have illegally occupied. They will acknowledge Dominion sovereignty over this entire sector. They will cease their unauthorized trade agreements. And they will pay tribute as compensation for their transgressions. And if they refuse? Thrain 9 asked quietly. Then we will demonstrate what happens when primitive species challenge the Caltharian Dominion. We will disable their vessels, occupy their colonies, and if necessary, we will blockade their home system until they understand the consequences of defiance. The council debated for another hour, but the outcome was never in doubt. The Dominion had built its empire on consistent enforcement of its rules. To allow the humans to operate freely would invite other species to question Caltharian authority. Better to deal with this situation now before it grew into a larger problem. When the vote was called, it was unanimous. The humans would receive their ultimatum. Vextar personally composed the message, taking care to make the Dominion's position absolutely clear. The text was translated into the human language that their primitive translation systems could understand. It outlined exactly what the Dominion expected: complete withdrawal from contested territories within 30 standard cycles, formal acknowledgement of Caltharian sovereignty, and payment of substantial tribute. The message concluded with a warning that Vextar felt captured the situation perfectly. The Caltharian Dominion has maintained order in this sector for 15,000 years. We have conquered threats that would destroy lesser civilizations. We have built an empire that spans 200 star systems. You have existed in space for mere decades. Consider carefully whether you wish to test our resolve. The response from humanity arrived within 12 hours. Vextar read it 3 times, his confusion growing with each reading. The message was polite, almost apologetic. The humans expressed regret for any misunderstanding. They requested clarification on various territorial claims. They suggested a diplomatic meeting to resolve the situation peacefully. They even invited Dominion representatives to visit Earth as honored guests. Most puzzling of all, they seemed genuinely confused about why the Dominion was upset with them. They think this is a misunderstanding, Zephyrim said, reading over Vextar's shoulder. They actually believe we can resolve this through negotiation. Vextar crumpled the display in his massive hand. They are either incredibly naive or attempting to stall for time. Either way, we will demonstrate the futility of their position. Assemble Battle Group 17. We depart for Frontier Station Epsilon in 6 hours. The humans want a diplomatic meeting? We will give them one. They will learn exactly what it means to negotiate with the Caltharian Dominion. Battle Group 17 consisted of 20 heavy cruisers, each one a masterpiece of Caltharian engineering. Their hulls were crafted from materials that could withstand planetary bombardment. Their weapons could crack moons. Their shields had never been penetrated in 15 centuries of warfare. As the battle group assembled in formation around Vextar's flagship, the sight filled him with satisfaction. This was power. This was dominance. This was what the humans would face if they chose defiance over submission. The journey to Frontier Station Epsilon took 3 days. The station hung in neutral space, equidistant from several major powers. It had served as a diplomatic venue for over 2,000 years, hosting negotiations that had prevented countless wars. The station's ancient protocols guaranteed the safety of all parties during negotiations, maintained by automated defense systems that would destroy any vessel that violated the peace. As Battle Group 17 approached the station, Vextar's sensors detected the human diplomatic vessel. It was exactly what he had expected, a small, unremarkable ship that looked like it had been cobbled together from spare parts. The hull showed signs of wear and basic maintenance. The power signature was weak. The entire vessel probably housed no more than a dozen crew members. That is their diplomatic mission? Vextar asked incredulously. One tiny ship? Apparently so, sir, Zephyrim confirmed. The vessel identifies itself as the Peaceful Journey. They are requesting permission to dock. Vextar allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The humans had arrived in a single small vessel while he had brought 20 of the most powerful warships in the galaxy. The message could not be clearer. This negotiation would be concluded on Caltharian terms. Grant them permission to dock. And make sure they have a perfect view of our battle group from the conference chamber. I want them to understand exactly what they are dealing with. As the human vessel docked at the station, Vextar gathered his delegation. He brought 12 senior officers, each one wearing full ceremonial armor that gleamed with commendations and battle honors. They would present an image of overwhelming military might and unquestionable authority. The conference chamber was located in the center of the station, surrounded by transparent walls that offered a 360-degree view of surrounding space. Vextar had specifically requested this room because it would showcase his entire battle group throughout the negotiations. The humans would sit across from him, see 20 massive warships floating in perfect formation, and understand the futility of resistance. When the doors opened and the human delegation entered, Vextar felt his first moment of uncertainty. He had expected frightened diplomats, perhaps accompanied by nervous military advisors. Instead, 3 humans walked in with calm, confident steps. They wore simple dark blue uniforms without any obvious weapons or armor. The leader was a woman of perhaps 50 Earth years, with short gray hair and alert brown eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the chamber. She approached the conference table and offered a slight bow. Supreme Commander Vextar, I presume. I am Ambassador Elena Chen of the Terran Diplomatic Corps. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. Vextar remained standing, using his full height to tower over the small human. Ambassador, we are not here to exchange pleasantries. You have received the Dominion's ultimatum. We are here to discuss the terms of your compliance. Ambassador Chen's expression never changed. She gestured to the chairs around the table with a slight smile. Of course. But surely we can discuss this in a civilized manner. I have arranged for refreshments from the station's galley. Would anyone care for tea? The revelation. Vextar stared at the human ambassador for a long moment, trying to determine if she was mocking him or genuinely failing to grasp the gravity of the situation. Behind her, through the transparent walls of the conference chamber, his 20 heavy cruisers hung in perfect formation like predators waiting to strike. The sight should have been enough to make any rational being understand their position. Yet Ambassador Chen sat calmly arranging cups of tea as if they were discussing trade agreements rather than the fate of her entire species. Ambassador Chen, Vextar said slowly, emphasizing each word. Perhaps you do not fully comprehend what is happening here. The Caltharian Dominion has ruled this sector for 15,000 years. We have conquered civilizations far more advanced than yours. We are offering you one opportunity to submit peacefully. I suggest you take it seriously. Chen looked up from pouring tea, her expression thoughtful. Oh, I assure you, Supreme Commander, we take this very seriously. That is precisely why I wanted to clarify a few points before we proceed. Your ultimatum mentioned territorial violations in the Kepler sector. Could you elaborate on the specific nature of those claims? Vextar's second-in-command, Commander Thelcor, stepped forward with barely contained irritation. The Kepler sector has been under Dominion authority for over 8,000 years. Your unauthorized settlements constitute a clear violation of established territorial boundaries. I see, Chin said, making notes on a small tablet. And when you say, under Dominion authority, do you mean you maintain permanent bases there? Administrative centers? Regular patrol routes? We have established markers and recognized trade routes, Thelkor replied stiffly. Our authority has been acknowledged by every civilized species in the region. Chin nodded slowly. Interesting. You see, when our survey teams explored the Kepler sector, they found no active installations, no permanent settlements, and no functioning infrastructure. The markers you mentioned were indeed there, but they were several thousand years old and no longer operational. According to our understanding of territorial law, abandoned claims revert to unclaimed status after 1,000 years without active maintenance. The conference room fell silent. Vextar felt a flash of anger at the human's presumption. You dare lecture us on territorial law? The Dominion's claims are not subject to the interpretations of a species that has barely learned to leave its own star system. Of course not, Chin agreed pleasantly. I am simply trying to understand the basis of your concerns so we can address them appropriately. You also mentioned disruption of trade networks. Could you provide specific examples? For the next hour, Vextar found himself engaged in the most frustrating conversation of his military career. Every demand he made was met with polite questions. Every threat was deflected with requests for clarification. Ambassador Chin seemed genuinely interested in understanding the Dominion's position, but her questions had a way of highlighting inconsistencies in their claims that Vextar had never considered before. When he mentioned the trade disruptions, Chin asked why the Dominion felt entitled to monopolize commerce in regions they did not actively patrol. When he cited ancient territorial rights, she pointed out that several of the systems in question had been settled by other species before the Dominion even reached them. When he invoked the Dominion's military superiority as justification for their demands, she simply asked what that had to do with legitimate territorial claims. Zephyrim leaned close to Vextar and whispered urgently. Sir, our sensors are detecting unusual energy readings from the human vessel. Nothing threatening, but the signatures do not match what we expected from their technology level. Vextar ignored the comment, focusing his attention on the infuriating human diplomat. Ambassador Chin, I believe you are deliberately missing the point. This is not a debate about the finer points of territorial law. This is a simple matter of power. The Caltharian Dominion possesses the military strength to enforce its will. You do not. Therefore, you will comply with our demands or face the consequences. Chin set down her teacup and folded her hands on the table. For the first time since entering the chamber, her pleasant expression shifted to something more serious. Supreme Commander, I appreciate your directness. Let me be equally direct. Before we discuss consequences, I think there are some things you should know about humanity and our presence in this region of space. We know everything we need to know, Vextar said dismissively. We have observed your primitive vessels. We have catalogued your limited technology. We have assessed your military capability. You are a young species that has overextended itself. There is nothing more to discuss. With respect, Commander, your intelligence is incomplete. Chin touched a small device on her collar. Captain Morrison, would you mind joining us? I think it is time for a more comprehensive briefing. Vextar was about to ask who Captain Morrison was when every tactical alert in his neural implant began screaming simultaneously. The conference chamber's windows suddenly dimmed as an enormous shadow fell across the station. Something massive had just appeared directly alongside Frontier Station Epsilon, and his sensors had never detected its approach. The object that now filled the windows was a ship, but calling it merely a ship was like calling a supernova merely bright. The vessel was easily 3 kilometers long, dwarfing even the largest Dominion dreadnought. Its hull was composed of a dark alloy that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The surface bristled with structures that Vextar's military experience recognized as weapons, though their design was unlike anything in the Dominion's arsenal. Most disturbing of all was the complete absence of warning. The ship had simply appeared as if it had been there all along waiting to be noticed. Vextar's flagship sensors were among the most sophisticated in the galaxy, capable of detecting a single fighter craft from 1,000,000 kilometers away. Yet this massive vessel had approached to within a few hundred meters without triggering a single alarm. Impossible, Thelkor whispered, his skin patterns flickering with shock. Nothing that large could achieve full stealth capability. The power requirements alone would be. A soft chime filled the conference chamber, and a figure materialized in the center of the room. Not a hologram, but an actual person transported through technology that the Dominion had only theorized about. Captain Sarah Morrison stood before them, tall and composed in a crisp black uniform. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical style, and her blue eyes swept across the Dominion delegation with professional assessment. "Supreme Commander Vextar," she said with a slight nod. "I am Captain Morrison of the Terran defense vessel, Silent Guardian." Ambassador Chin suggested it might be helpful to continue this discussion with all relevant information on the table. Vextar's neural implants were feeding him a continuous stream of impossible data about the vessel outside. The power signature suggested energy generation capacity that exceeded most stars. The shield harmonics cycled through frequencies that should not be possible to produce. The spatial distortion around the hull indicated technology that bent the fundamental laws of physics. "How?" was all Vextar could manage to say. Captain Morrison gestured, and holographic displays materialized throughout the chamber without any visible projector. They showed detailed specifications, performance data, and operational histories that made Vextar's head spin. "I think there may have been some confusion about human technological capabilities, Commander. Your scouts observed our merchant vessels and made certain assumptions based on their external appearance. Those assumptions were understandable but somewhat inaccurate." The displays showed cross-sections of what the Dominion had classified as primitive human cargo ships. The hulls that had appeared to be simple metal construction were actually composed of adaptive metamaterials that could reconfigure themselves for different missions. The slow engines that seemed barely capable of efficient faster-than-light travel were actually operating at a fraction of their capability to avoid drawing attention. The small crew complements reflected advanced automation, not limited resources. "Our merchant vessels," Morrison explained conversationally, "are designed to appear unremarkable to casual observation. We have found this approach reduces unnecessary complications when establishing trade relationships with new civilizations. However, their actual capabilities are somewhat more extensive than their appearance suggests." She gestured again, and the display shifted to show human military vessels. Vextar felt his confidence crumbling as he studied the specifications. The ships were not just superior to Dominion technology, they operated on principles that suggested an entirely different understanding of physics. "Our defensive systems rely primarily on quantum field manipulation rather than traditional armor or energy shields," Morrison continued in the same pleasant tone. "We can phase matter between dimensional states, making our vessels effectively intangible to conventional weapons. Our offensive capabilities include relativistic particle beams, contained antimatter warheads, and targeted gravitational disruption. We prefer not to use the gravitational weapons as they can cause unintended stellar disruptions, but they are available if needed." Thelcor found his voice, though it cracked slightly. "How many vessels do you have with these capabilities?" Morrison seemed to consider the question. "In this galaxy? Currently deployed? Approximately 15,000 ships of various classifications. Though I should mention that most of our fleet is engaged in deep space operations in other galaxies. The forces in this region are primarily focused on observation and peaceful contact." The number hit Vextar like a physical blow. 15,000 ships, each one apparently capable of outperforming anything the Dominion possessed. His entire worldview was collapsing around him like a star-going supernova. The Caltharian Dominion, which had dominated this region of space for 15 millennia, was suddenly revealed to be nothing more than a minor regional power operating under the protection of forces they had never even suspected existed. "Observation?" Vextar asked weakly. "You have been watching us?" Ambassador Chin spoke up, her voice gentle. "For approximately 80 years, Commander. When humanity re-emerged into galactic affairs, we conducted extensive surveys of local civilizations. The Caltharian Dominion was of particular interest due to your long history and stable governance structure." "Re-emerged?" Vextar seized on the word. "You said re-emerged. What does that mean?" Morrison and Chin exchanged a glance, and Morrison nodded. Chin activated her tablet, and new holographic displays appeared showing a timeline that stretched back over a millennium. "Humanity has actually been spacefaring for approximately 900 years, Commander. What you observed 50 years ago was not humanity's first venture into the stars. It was our return after a period of isolation. The timeline showed human expansion across multiple galaxies, then a sudden contraction back to their home system, followed by a long period of apparent inactivity, and finally the recent expansion that had alarmed the Dominion. 700 years ago, Chin explained, humanity encountered a species we call the Harvesters. They were extragalactic entities that consumed entire civilizations for resources. They had destroyed over 30 galaxies before they reached ours. The war lasted 80 years and cost humanity 90% of our population and most of our colonial infrastructure. Vextar listened in growing horror as Chin described a conflict on a scale that made Dominion military campaigns look like minor skirmishes. Entire star systems had been sterilized. Planets had been cracked open like eggs. The harvesters had possessed technology that made even current human capabilities look primitive by comparison. We won, Morrison said quietly, but the cost was staggering. Humanity withdrew to our home system to rebuild and to develop new technologies that would ensure we could defend ourselves against any future existential threats. That is why our vessels appear so advanced compared to local standards. They were designed to face enemies far more dangerous than anything in this galaxy. Chin nodded. When we finally felt secure enough to re-engage with the galaxy, we did so carefully. We had learned the dangers of rapid, uncontrolled expansion. We established colonies slowly, made contact with local civilizations gradually, and maintained extensive observation networks to identify potential threats before they could develop into serious problems. Threats? Vextar asked. What threats? This region of space has been peaceful for thousands of years. Morrison's expression became serious. Has it, Commander? 300 years ago, did the Dominion experience an outbreak of the Crimson Plague on the colony world of Thelmar Prime? Vextar nodded slowly. Yes. It was a devastating disease that threatened to spread throughout our empire. Our medical teams worked for 2 years to develop a treatment. We barely contained it. You contained it because we synthesized a cure and introduced it into Thelmar Prime's water supply, Chin said gently. The disease was not natural. It was a biological weapon deployed by an automated probe left behind by a long-extinct species. Your medical teams were working toward a solution, but the plague would have spread to 17 more worlds before they succeeded. The revelation hit Vextar like another blow. The Crimson Plague had been one of the greatest crises in recent Dominion history. Millions had died before the treatment was developed. The scientists who discovered the cure were celebrated as heroes. Now he was learning that human intervention had saved his civilization, and no one had even known humans existed. 50 years ago, Morrison continued, did the Dominion detect unusual gravitational anomalies in the Outer Reach region? Yes, Thelcor answered when Vextar seemed unable to speak. Our scientists studied them for months but could not determine the cause. Eventually they dissipated on their own. Those anomalies were weapons fire from a conflict between two species from outside this galaxy, Morrison explained. They were fighting over territorial claims and did not care that their battle was taking place near inhabited systems. We persuaded them to take their dispute elsewhere. The gravitational distortions you detected were the residual effects of their weapons after we neutralized them. Chin pulled up another display showing a star map with dozens of markers scattered across Dominion space. Over the past 50 years, humanity has quietly managed or resolved 47 potential crisis situations in this region. Rogue AI outbreaks, automated weapons platforms from extinct civilizations, dimensional breaches, stellar instabilities that would have gone supernova, and 3 separate incursions by species that view younger civilizations as resources to be harvested. The Caltharian Dominion, Morrison said carefully, has existed peacefully for 15,000 years not because this region of space is inherently safe, but because humanity has been maintaining a defensive perimeter around it. We have been protecting you, Commander. Along with dozens of other civilizations in this sector. Vextar slumped into a chair, his legs suddenly unable to support his weight. His entire understanding of galactic reality had been inverted. The Dominion was not a great power maintaining order through strength. They were children playing at Empire while beings of incomprehensible capability watched over them from the shadows. Why? He asked quietly. Why protect us? Why not simply conquer us if you possess such power? Ambassador Chen's expression softened with something that looked like genuine compassion. Because conquest is easy, Commander. Building civilizations is hard. The Caltharian Dominion has maintained stability in this region for 15,000 years. You have developed art, philosophy, and technology. You have raised dozens of species up from primitive conditions and integrated them into a functioning society. That is worth preserving. Humanity learned a hard lesson during the Harvester War, Morrison added. Power without purpose is meaningless. We could conquer this entire galaxy in a matter of months, but what would we gain? More territory to defend? More species that resent us? We prefer to let civilizations develop naturally, intervening only when absolutely necessary to prevent disasters. Chin stood and walked to the windows overlooking space. The silent guardian hung there like a dark monument to human capability, making the Dominion's battle group look like toys by comparison. Your expansion has actually been a good thing, Commander. You have brought stability to regions that might otherwise have fallen into chaos. You have mediated disputes, facilitated trade, and provided protection to species that needed it. Those are not the actions of tyrants. They are the actions of a civilization that genuinely cares about order and prosperity. But, Morrison interjected firmly, your recent approach to humanity has been problematic. We understand that our rapid expansion alarmed you. We understand that our presence threatened your established trade networks. However, sending an ultimatum backed by military force to a civilization you knew nothing about was unwise. Vextar managed a bitter laugh. Unwise? That is one way to describe it. We threatened you with war. What happens now? Will you occupy our territories? Dismantle our government? Make an example of us to discourage other species from making similar mistakes? None of those things, Chin said firmly. She returned to the table and sat down across from Vextar. What happens now, Commander, is that we talk. We discuss how the Caltharian Dominion and humanity can coexist peacefully. We establish formal diplomatic relations. We share information about threats that neither of us can face alone. And perhaps most importantly, we work together to maintain stability in this region of space. Morrison nodded. The galaxy is bigger than either of our civilizations, Commander. There are threats out there that make the Harvesters look manageable. Entities that exist in dimensions we barely understand. Ancient weapons that activate on their own schedules. Species that view organic life as a temporary inconvenience. Humanity cannot face all of these threats alone, and neither can the Dominion. You are offering an alliance? Vextar asked incredulously. After we threatened you with war? We are offering partnership, Chin corrected gently. The Dominion has 15,000 years of experience governing diverse populations. You understand local politics, trade networks, and cultural dynamics in ways that humanity does not. We have military capabilities and technological resources that could benefit both our civilizations. Together, we could create something far greater than either of us could achieve alone. Vextar looked around at his delegation. Thelkor and the other officers wore expressions of shock and confusion. Their entire worldview had been shattered in the space of a few hours. They had come here expecting to dictate terms to a primitive species. Instead, they had discovered that their entire civilization had been living under the protection of forces they never suspected existed. I need time, Vextar said finally. I need to consult with the High Council. This is not a decision I can make alone. Of course, Chin agreed. Take whatever time you need. But Commander, I would ask one thing. When you report to your council, please emphasize this point. Humanity has no interest in conquest or domination. We simply want to coexist peacefully and work together toward common goals. The galaxy is vast enough for both our civilizations to thrive. Morrison stood and prepared to transport back to her vessel. One more thing, Commander. The Silent Guardian will remain in the area for the next several weeks. If you need to verify any of the information we have provided, we would be happy to arrange demonstrations or share technical data. We want your council to make an informed decision based on accurate understanding, not fear or speculation. As Morrison dematerialized and Chin prepared to return to her vessel, Vextar sat in stunned silence. Through the windows he could see his battle group that had seemed so impressive just hours before. 20 heavy cruisers that represented the pinnacle of Dominion military engineering. Next to the Silent Guardian, they looked like ancient relics from a more primitive age. The humans departed peacefully, leaving Vextar and his delegation alone in the conference chamber. For several long minutes no one spoke. Finally Thelkor broke the silence. Sir, what do we tell the High Council? Vextar stood slowly, his body feeling heavy with the weight of what he had learned. We tell them the truth. The Caltharian Dominion is not the greatest power in the galaxy. We never were. We have been living in a protective bubble maintained by beings we never knew existed. And now those beings are offering us a choice, partnership or irrelevance. He looked out at the stars, seeing them with new eyes. Somewhere out there were the threats that humanity had described. Ancient weapons, dimensional anomalies, hostile species from other galaxies. The universe was far more dangerous and far stranger than Dominion philosophers had ever imagined. We tell the Council that the galaxy is bigger than we thought, Vextar continued. And that humanity, despite everything we assumed about them, may be the best allies we could hope for in facing what comes next. As the Dominion delegation prepared to depart Frontier Station Epsilon, Vextar took one last look at the Silent Guardian. The massive vessel hung in space like a promise and a warning. Humanity possessed the power to destroy the Dominion utterly. Instead, they offered friendship. The Supreme Commander of the Caltharian Dominion, veteran of 100 campaigns and architect of a dozen conquests, found himself hoping desperately that his council would be wise enough to accept that offer. Because if the humans were telling the truth about the dangers lurking in the wider galaxy, the Dominion would need every ally it could find. And somehow Vextar suspected they were telling the truth. After all, beings capable of such power had no reason to lie to those they could so easily destroy. The humans had smiled when faced with Dominion threats not out of ignorance or arrogance, but because they knew something the Dominion was only now beginning to understand. In the vast darkness of space, humanity was not a primitive species stumbling toward the stars. They were ancient guardians, veterans of conflicts that made Dominion military history look like children's games, quietly protecting younger civilizations while they grew strong enough to face the universe on their own terms. The question now was whether the Caltharian Dominion could set aside 15,000 years of pride and accept the truth. Sometimes the greatest strength comes not from conquest, but from knowing when to make friends and